leftists keep sharing the same lies trying to justify their vote for Sniffy Joe. They keep sharing this meme, which has been fact-checked and debunked. Then again, what do you expect from people who call a biology textbook propaganda? Biden's deficit spin. In recent speeches, President Joe Biden has been misleadingly taking credit for cutting federal deficits by historic amounts, though most of the reduction in deficits is the result of expiring emergency pandemic spending. Deficits fell between fiscal year 2020 and 2021 far less than initially projected after Biden added to them with more emergency pandemic and infrastructure spending. And the deficits under Biden and beyond are projected to remain historically high compared with pre-pandemic levels. In recent remarks, Biden took credit for cutting the deficit by $350 billion in fiscal year 2021 and claimed his proposed budget for fiscal year 2022 will cut the deficit by $1.3 trillion this year. You know, the budget I submitted, my first budget that passed and became law, it cut the federal deficit by $350 billion, Biden said in a speech on April 19. We cut the deficit $350 billion. And the budget I propose this year, if it comes to total fruition, it will cut the deficit by $1.3 trillion. So when my Republican friends start talking about big spenders and the reason why there's inflation, take a look. Take a look. We've cut the deficit drastically. Last year, as I said, we cut the deficit by more than $350 billion. This year, we're on track for $1.3 trillion in cuts. And look, that would be the largest debt reduction in American history. Don't listen to my Republican friends in Congress. Last year, my budget reduced the deficit by $350 billion, Biden said in a speech in Portland, Oregon, on April 21. You hear me? We didn't increase the deficit a penny. We reduced it by $350 billion. In February 2021, shortly after Biden took office and before any of Biden's fiscal policies were enacted, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office projected a federal budget deficit of about $2.3 trillion in 2021, $874 billion less than the shortfall recorded in 2020. It projected deficits to fall again to a $1.1 trillion deficit in fiscal year 2022, meaning another $1.2 trillion reduction in the deficit from 2021. Combined, the deficits in fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year 2022 were expected to total $3.3 trillion. Those projections assumed no new changes in federal law. But on March 11, 2021, Biden signed the American Rescue Plan into law. The new emergency pandemic relief law included, among other things, increased child care tax credits, extended unemployment payments, small business support and $1,400 checks to qualifying Americans. The law cost an estimated $1.9 trillion over 10 years. Fast forward to July, when the CBO was able to take into account the new spending approved by Biden. Instead of an $874 billion drop in deficits between 2020 and 2021, the deficit was then projected to drop just $126 billion, from $3.13 trillion to $3 trillion. Moreover, the combined deficits for 2021 and 2022 were projected to total nearly $4.2 trillion, $842 billion more than the February forecast. It's pretty silly, Mark Goldwein, Senior Vice President and Senior Policy Director at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, said of Biden's deficit-cutting claims. Biden, didn't cut the deficit, he increased it. They are taking credit for the fact that deficits fell in 2021 to 2022, Goldwein said. If they had done nothing, deficits would have fallen by $1 trillion. They fell by much less than they were going to. We should also note that while Biden credited the budget I submitted last year for reducing deficits, the fiscal year 2022 budget Biden proposed in May 2021 did not become law. As we have explained in the past, presidents' budgets are largely symbolic statements of priorities, not legislation on which Congress actually votes. Congress never did pass anything like Biden's budget, Howard Gleckman, a senior fellow in the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center, told us via email. Congress did finally pass an omnibus appropriations bill halfway through the fiscal year, he said. But it funded most programs at prior year levels plus a small bump, and included none of Biden's ambitious tax increases. Ultimately, CBO said fiscal year 2021 ended with a deficit of nearly $2.8 trillion, about $360 billion less than the deficit in 2020. That's similar to the $350 billion figure Biden uses. CBO noted that the deficit for 2021 ended up smaller than it had projected in July, mostly because income tax receipts were greater than CBO projected. CBO said greater than expected revenue growth in 2021 was due to strong growth in economic activity, following the substantial disruption in 2020 caused by the pandemic. CBO credited, in part, legislation enacted in response to the pandemic. As a share of GDP, which is really the way to look at this, deficits would decline from 12.4% of GDP in 2021 to 5.8% this year to 4.5% next year, Glickman said. But most of that action is due to two factors: the booming economy that is likely to increase revenues substantially and a sharp decline in pandemic-related spending and/or tax cuts. I suppose Biden gets some credit for this since he and the Democrats in Congress designed the American Rescue Plan to include temporary spending, Glickman said. But it is not as if this year's budget includes major spending reductions. In fact, many of his proposals would increase spending. In a fact sheet on the president's proposed 2023 budget, the White House boasted about the president's strategy to grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out and his effective management of the American Rescue Plan, a strategy that was built on smart, fiscally prudent investments that helped jumpstart our economy. However, in an April 8 blog post titled "No, President Biden has not implemented historic deficit reduction," CRFB wrote, with this emphasis, that the main source of falling deficits is the expiration of most COVID relief such as enhanced unemployment benefits and recovery rebates. The remaining decrease is largely the result of strong income growth and high inflation. CRFB also noted that even after this post-pandemic drop, deficits will remain historically high. The president's actions to date have not reduced deficits but instead increased them, CRFB wrote. Between the American Rescue Plan, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and various executive orders, we estimate at least $2.5 trillion has been added to deficits through 2031 over the president's term so far. John Huntley, senior economist at the Penn Wharton Budget Model, agreed that the deficit reduction is mostly due to expiring pandemic spending by the federal government. The decline in the deficit between fiscal years 2021 and 2022 was largely expected, Huntley told us via email. As the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget notes, deficits were forecast to decline by about $1.4 trillion from 2021 to 2022. The 2021 Congressional Budget Office (CBO) long-term budget outlook highlights the reason for this decline. Under current law, a huge amount of mandatory spending was scheduled to expire in 2022. Therefore, the federal deficit was going to decline under current law. Congress would have needed to explicitly pass an extension of these mandatory spending programs to maintain 2021 levels of federal spending. As no such extension passed, spending declined in excess of $1 trillion in fiscal year 2022. A Penn Wharton budget model analysis of Biden's proposed fiscal year 2023 federal budget, which includes more federal spending but also new revenues such as higher taxes on high-income earners, concluded that it would reduce government debt in the first decade relative to current law, meaning the law without Biden's budget being enacted, according to a conventional, static forecast. That's relatively in line with the White House projecting that its budget would cut deficits by more than $1 trillion over 10 years. In a dynamic analysis, which includes economic feedback that takes into account a projected reduction in the workforce tied to the proposed child tax credits, PWBM projected a 2.1% increase in the federal debt over the next 10 years, relative to current law, but a 1.7% reduction in government debt by 2050. Biden's proposed budget assumes passage of most of what was in Biden's Build Back Better plan, which would increase government spending on public health, education, housing, crime prevention and other programs, but would be offset, in part, by new taxes on high-income and high-wealth households. The Build Back Better bill stalled after Democratic Senator Joe Manchin announced in December that he would not support it. But Biden since has said that he is confident Congress can pass pieces of the Build Back Better agenda. Senators Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, the Democratic holdouts who effectively killed the legislation last year, are reportedly unwilling to revisit the bill this year. Biden wants you to believe he's creating jobs, despite what your own eyes tell you. President Joe Biden insists Americans are benefiting from record wage gains amid disastrous inflation rates. President Joe Biden loves to take credit where it isn't due on the economy. Americans are back to work, he said Friday of the latest jobs report, citing record job creation and record wage gains. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nominal wage gains since Biden took office have been wiped out by sky-high inflation, now around 8%. All jobs now come with a built-in pay cut that's only going to get worse unless the president changes course. Worse, employment will crater if he gets the tax hikes he proposes. And he and his administration have not created a single job. Biden's job creation numbers are not what they seem. In February of 2020, the nation had around 152.5 million total non-farm employees, the highest number ever. Then came the pandemic, which chopped that number down to near 130.5 million. We've since been creeping back up to where we were before, and creeping more slowly as Biden's policies took effect. And we're still not there yet. The latest count is 150.9 million total non-farm employees. Republican states have led in job creation as Democrat states like New York lag behind on keeping outdated COVID mandates. So we're still significantly short of that 152.5 million peak, which means there's been no job creation, only an anemic recovery. State-level data? Also ugly. The vast majority of U.S. states haven't recovered their pandemic job losses. New York is missing 454,000 jobs, with New York City missing 283,000. California has a deficit of around 677,000. Both states have unemployment rates well above the national rate. Under President Donald Trump, the economy actually did add jobs pre-pandemic. Close to 9 million, in fact, from January 2016 to January 2020. And the median household saw historic wage gains. The 7% annual increase in 2019 was the biggest on record. President Joe Biden's stimulus checks created a workers' shortage while many Americans preferred to live on handouts. President Joe Biden claims Americans are back to work. Christopher Sadowski. Even if we're using the idiotic Biden standard for jobs created, i.e., COVID killed jobs returning as the pandemic fades, Trump created almost 12 million between April 2020 and December 2020. Biden's much-touted creation of 7.9 million is much less, over much more time. Our economy, Biden blustered on Friday, is no longer on the mend, it's on the move. Pure hot air. The numbers don't lie. Our jobs picture is improving too slowly and workers are seeing their gains erode daily, with gas, groceries, rent and everything else going through the roof. Former President Donald Trump's sound fiscal policies created approximately 9 million during his presidency. Grim reality may not stop Biden from patting himself on the back for his fake achievements, but his collapsing poll numbers show Americans believe their own eyes, not his bull. Inflation's roaring, and all Biden can offer is a recycled pack of lies. President Joe Biden's handlers sent him out to declare that fighting inflation is now his top domestic priority. But even if his plan weren't a joke, why would anyone believe him when his vow came packaged in a host of lazy lies? Inflation, he insisted, is being driven by the pandemic, which largely ended over a year ago, and Putin's price hike. For the record, it was April 14 last year that the White House insisted the already developing inflation would be transitory. Biden and company kept that up through November, before switching to blaming it on corporate greed and now Putin. The president still refuses to take any responsibility for it himself. Never mind the $1.9 trillion he and his fellow Democrats pumped into an already hot recovery last spring, which is when U.S. inflation took off and Europe's didn't. It can't have anything to do with Dems spending, he actually argued, because we brought the deficit down. Lying liar, it's down only because Congress has stopped dumping new trillions in the name of COVID relief. And Biden didn't want it to stop. The Build Back Better bill he spent months trying to pass would have kept the spending party going. He won't even own his war on domestic energy. He bragged that the nation pumped more oil in his first year than in President Donald Trump's. Too bad it still hasn't met the production of Trump's last year, before Biden took over. He pitched more malarkey by talking about unused drilling permits, without noting how permits are just one step in a long process now tangled in red tape. And what company will sink big money into that process when the administration has publicly vowed to kill the entire industry? The lies got downright cartoonish. Biden ludicrously claimed ultra-mega Republicans want to raise taxes and get rid of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, while his plan, more bits of the dead Build Back Better bill, would magically lower costs, even as companies would raise prices to cover the new corporate taxes he'd impose. His claims about a supposed Republican plan already earned 3 Pinocchios, nearly 4, from liberal Washington Post fact-checker Glenn Kessler before Tuesday. And what's the deal with the silly new ultra-mega shtick? Is Biden trying to pin down the AOC vote? Why did the White House pitch this pack of lies as a major policy address? And if it were, why send the president out to talk in the noon hour, when next to no one would watch? Is he too tired by 9 p.m.? We can only conclude that Biden and his entire team are just plain out of ideas only a third of the way into his term, but refuse to even think about any new ones. They're just going through the motions. Too bad for them. A furious nation wants results.